Our next topic is Coaching for Confidence, Kids and Anxiety. And Charity Hudson will be presenting this to us. Charity Hudson is a support worker with Anxiety Disorders Association of Manitoba, ADAM for short. She worked for 12 years part-time in the Parkland South area. She is presenting on behalf of Tami Giesbrecht, and Tami has worked in mental health for 22 years. She facilitates support groups in Winkler and Altona and provides one-on-one support as well as teaching cognitive behavior classes. Her contact info will be posted in the video comments. So Charity, we're happy to have you here today and sharing with us. You can take it away.
Thank you. Welcome. I'm so happy to be here, and I'm happy to be presenting for Tami. I am more familiar with Coaching for Confidence, so that's why Tami asked me to kind of step in. So I'm going to share my screen here and hope all works well. Yes. So Coaching for Confidence is a fairly new program to our public, not new necessarily to us at the Anxiety Disorders Association. We've been kind of in the works over the last several years in gathering this for our community. So I'm really happy that we've piloted it here. I have just kind of, maybe I should start with a background on what Coaching for Confidence come from. So Coaching for Confidence was developed by Dr. John Walker. He was a psychologist, and he ran a clinical anxiety clinic in Manitoba here for several years. He's since passed, but he handed this program over to us. He did come and visit me here in the Parkland area in 2015 and did a presentation to parents, the school division here, about our program. And I was actually fortunate enough to be a part of his pilot project, which actually at that time was an online Coaching for Confidence. So I myself have taken it, I've used it, I find it to be a very effective program. So the best way I thought for me to share that with you today is to kind of walk through each module and to kind of give you some examples on what that looks like. So when somebody comes and wants to participate in our program, then they'll have a really good idea on what is involved. So again, Coaching for Confidence is it's a manual program right now. And we at the Anxiety Disorders Association are just starting to roll it out. So now I have to, okay. So what is Coaching for Confidence? So Coaching for Confidence is a program. It's primarily made for parents. However, caregivers, teachers, early childhood educators, and really anybody like grandparents can participate in Coaching for Confidence in order to support a child who is anxious. It was Dr. Walker's belief and motto that parents are the best and most consistent resource for their children and can offer the most guidance and teaching. So the program is developed for ages 3 to 12. However, parents can learn these techniques before the age of 3 if they are starting to notice anxiety tendencies within their children. It's not really recommended for children over 12, just because we're starting to get into the teen years and things can be really more complex. So he kind of just narrowed it from ages 3 to 12. So it depends on where your child is at. Some children are a little bit more delayed, and so they might benefit from the program if they're over the age of 12, but that's something we can definitely discuss. But we really just try and target the age range. Like I said at the beginning, we did pilot that here starting in September. What that looked like is we offered it on a monthly basis to individuals, and it composed of from 6:30 to 8:30 on the second Tuesday of every month. We did 1 hour of teaching and just talking about the program and the module for the month, and then we did 1 hour of support. where parents were able to kind of share their struggles, really talk about and formulate a plan, and kind of put things into action so they were more successful with helping their children at home. So we were offering that program monthly, like I said, from September till June. However, due to COVID, we are cut short. We were going to do an online component for the remaining months. However, parents have decided that in-person was the best option at this point, and they've actually requested that that be postponed until the fall. So one of the main questions that I usually have is, what is the cost? And Anxiety Disorders Association is a charitable nonprofit organization. So we are limitedly funded. We rely a lot on our donations. So we do need to charge for the cost of the manual, and that is $25 for the manual. Once you have the manual, it's for yours to keep. You can write in it. You're able to kind of answer all the questions and go through it, and really keep it as a really good resource for yourself. It's a really great tool. We use this manual in through the program, and so you need to bring it to every session, and we kind of go through it bit by bit. The manual itself, it helps you to work through, it answers questions, it gives you scenarios, it goes through and addresses all kinds of issues, even problem solving and things that you wouldn't even think of. Dr. Walker has foreseen it and addressed it in the manual, so it's really great. So like I said, I'm just going to go through online the manual bit by bit. So our first section in a module in our manual is understanding anxiety. So it talks about what is anxiety, the basic emotions, anxiety, preparing for the challenge, and 3 systems of fear and anxiety. So in all ADAM groups, there's always a foundation of understanding what anxiety is, and we need to provide some education about addressing anxious behaviors. In Coaching for Confidence manual, this is no different. In this part of the program, Dr. Walker educated the participants, like the parent, etc., in the differences and similarities for adults and children on what anxiety may look like in their children. So for these first few modules, I really encourage all parents to attend. However, in the end, they do pick which modules they want to attend and which ones they don't, whichever ones they feel fit the needs of their child. But everybody needs a basic understanding of what anxiety is, and just to make sure that they feel like this program is going to fit their child and their child does have anxiety, because not always is it diagnosed right away. It might be more concerns about the parent, and we just want to address all of that. Going from understanding our anxiety, we lead into what the anxiety patterns are. So when does anxiety become a problem, and what are the common patterns of anxiety in children? So in exploring a number of anxiety patterns, this chapter helps us look at specific behaviors in our children and see what specific areas we need to help our children work through. So throughout this manual, Dr. Walker adds vignettes, scenarios of real cases to help assist and apply the concepts of so for example, I'm just going to read you one so you can kind of understand kind of some of the how real some of these situations are. So under anxiety patterns, so Allison, age 5, has trouble going to daycare. Allison has missed many days of daycare. Every morning when it is time to get ready, she gets very upset, cries, does not want to get dressed, and says she is too sick to go. When mom is dropping her off, she clings to her mom and cries for quite a while after her mother leaves. Allison can only fall asleep at night if her mother is in bed with her. She often comes to her mom's bed if she wakes up at night and cries, and if her mom takes her back to her own bed unless mom stays with her. Allison's mom feels a lot of stress about how hard it is to get Allison to daycare in the morning, and she worries about being late or missing work because of this. So you could see how a lot of us on the site today can kind of relate to the situation with Allison and her mom. And so Allison's struggling a lot. So how this works out is we talk about what are the patterns of anxiety in Allison, and we compare them to our own children. And he leads us through, the manual leads us through what to do in Allison's situation. So each chapter builds, module builds onto the other. So we've gone from understanding anxiety to the patterns, and now we're going to overcoming anxiety. So we go through the following steps. Step 1 is accepting your child's anxiety. Step 2 is watching your child's pattern of anxiety. Step 3 is helping your child's pattern of anxiety. Step 4 is helping your child to think realistically about a feared situation. And step 5 is problem solving with your child. So these steps can help navigate you into a starting point and formulate a plan that will assist your child in reducing anxiety symptoms. Each step is well laid out with examples. So in this example is Amber, age 5. She's scared of fire drills. Amber was very frightened by fire drills at school. She hated loud sounds of the fire alarm. Amber also felt sick and upset when it was time to go to school. She told Mom that she was afraid there would be another fire alarm when she was at school. Her mom promised that whenever there was a fire drill, she would come to the school ahead of time to be with her. Amber liked this idea, but she was still worried that there would be a fire alarm at school when her mother was not there. So it's asking, what is the problem and with the solution? So again, we go through each, just kind of sharing some of these scenarios so you can kind of get a feel for how we work through some common issues that you might be having at home with your children, and or something similar, and how we can kind of work through them. And sometimes as parents, we kind of jump in and we want what's best for our children, and we don't always realize that some of the times when we step in, what we're doing is actually causing more harm than good. And so these issues are really addressed really well in our manual. So in the worries module, so we talk about several things. So for one, that worries are normal, and our thoughts and emotions, thinking styles, pattern of fearful thinking, belief of confident children, steps of realistic thinking, effective questioning, and realistic thinking. So what I like most about this manual is that it, as a parent, I feel like Dr. Walker, it really spoke to me with having a child who has anxiety, and lays out in each section this really well. In the worries section, he helped me to understand worries, he helps you to soothe your concern and address some of your own things as a parent that we may not realize, as I said, and we contribute to our children's anxiety. He provides doable solutions that are easy to learn, patterns to address, and an opportunity to enhance communication without with our children to assess them in problem solving and relaxation. He also makes it easy for you to, by stating if this is not your child, to skip certain sections so you don't get lost in the manual of items that doesn't pertain to your child. In this section in particular, he addresses one with what I call, for me, it's a big parenting lesson, my top 3, that is underestimating our child's ability to cope. So how many of us don't want our child to feel any pain, frustration, or sadness? We often adjust things to avoid these feelings within our children. I think you all might be sitting here having an aha moment right now where you might have done that in one time or another. I know as a parent, I myself have been guilty of that, of saying, trying to offer some avoidance so my child doesn't have to feel hurt or pain. Because we don't like that as parents. It makes us feel very uncomfortable. So, but we are actually underestimating our child's ability to cope in many situations. There are some rare situations where that's definitely necessary, like in dangerous situations where we don't want them to get burned or things like that. But in things where we can avoid, where they're going to have hurt feelings, or they're having anxiety or stress in going into a situation, so we just avoid the situation so that way they don't feel any anxiety or stress. So we actually do want to build that ability to cope for them. So in my group, that when we piloted, we had a really great conversation about building our children's ability to cope, and some examples that parents have come up with where they have really stepped in and enabled their child to anxiety to heighten in certain situations by by avoiding certain situations. So it is essential to teach and assist our kids coping skills. And so I do know that our mental health system is seeing more and more young adults who are having really hard time being an adult. Today, they're having a hard time coping with small situations where normally they should be able to cope. And this is partly because of our avoidance as parents. So it's really essential that we kind of step in and address these situations with our children. So these can be just simple things. And if you think about them, they're not complex in any way, shape, or form. It's things like we are looking at if our child is scared of heights, for example, we might not have them go near any situations where they might have to step on a stool if they're uncomfortable. We just it's easier sometimes as a parent to have them not do that and just carry on with the day. But encouraging them and talking to them how we can do that is essential, and it teaches that in this program. I'm hoping that made sense. So problem solving. So helping your child with problem solving, developing problem solving skills, key steps in problem solving, and handling a stressful situation, handling interpersonal situations, handling an emergency, practicing common emergencies, and the value of problem solving is our next module. So problem solving builds on those coping skills. However, as adults, we do not always have the best problem solving skills ourselves. So no worries. Dr. Walker has developed a great manual and he's developed written in this module on how to help break down the problem solving process with each step-by-step process, and teaches us on how to teach our kids good problem solving skills. It uses the same step process we teach to adults for problem solving, which includes describing a problem, identifying a range of solutions or approaches, looking at pros and cons, and deciding on the best approach. So practice putting that approach into action and reviewing how the solution worked. So specifically in this section, it breaks down a number of situations that children may worry about, some of which could actually happen. So for example, Ashton, one of the scenarios is about Ashton, who's age 8, and he's worried about tornadoes. So it just goes through a dialogue, and I'm just going to go through it with you. So Ashton, there's supposed to be a thunderstorm tonight. I'm scared there might be a tornado. Dad says, this is the time of year where there is a tornado once in a while. Ashton, I heard that there was a tornado warning last week. I hate it when they do that. Dad says, how do you know if there is a chance of tornado? Ashton says the weather station tells you there is a tornado warning, and then a tornado watch is at risk. Dad said, that's right. How can you tell if a tornado might be getting close? Ashton says, I'm not sure. Dad says, I have never been in a tornado, but I have heard that it is very windy and that you can hear a sound like a big train coming. If that was happening, what would you do? Ashton, I think you are supposed to go down to the basement. That's right. And where are you supposed to go in the basement? Ashton says, I'm not sure. Dad says, usually you are supposed to go down the basement and under the stairs or in a corner. Why don't we go down to look and find a good place to go? So Dad takes Ashton down and shows him where the family would go if there was a tornado. Since Ashton has worried about this, the family practiced having a tornado drill twice a week for a few weeks. everybody in the family has joined in. So you could see how Ashton's dad problem solved the situation to go through, so that way to help Ashton's ability to cope. So if there was a tornado, he would feel good that he knew what to do. And so if he worried about it, then he would know the steps on what he needed to do if that tornado did appear. Because the reality is that tornadoes do come once in a while, and depending on where Ashton lives, the likelihood might be higher than it would somewhere else. So we need to be realistic about some things happening. So just as we are in now, right now, like we might have kids worried about the pandemic, about COVID, and about their family members getting COVID. And so one of the things that we need to understand is not to discount that, and because that could be true, that could be reality in some cases. And so we need to help our children prepare if they are the worriers of these situations that they hear, then to say that, yes, that could happen, but what would we do if that did happen, and break down those steps for them and kind of work through and practicing on what we could do to kind of put the assurance in there that's practical. So that actually leads us from, we've gone from developing some ability to cope, building on those coping skills, problem solving, to now reassurance seeking. So this is one of my, adding to those top three, this is my second parenting lessons that I learned from this program that I really thought was my aha moment, is the reassurance seeking. So the steps that we talk about in this module is excessive reassurance seeking, encouraging independence, and reducing reassurance by giving steps. So again, as a parent, one of the things that I have learned is, and there was a really big wake-up call, is that we over-reassure our children, especially our anxious children, because we're actually trying to help them to calm down, and what we're actually doing is enabling them in a lot of ways. So, for example, this might be something very small that we don't even realize is happening. So my daughter, who will be 3 next week, you know, went through, I think, a normal stage at age 2, where she this winter has been asking a lot about, you know, where are we going? What are we doing? Where did dad go? Things like that. She generally would like to know. And these are things like, for sure, I'm going to answer to her saying, you know, dad went to work, you know, we're going to grandma's house, whatever, we're answering. Now, the key is that sometimes within a few minutes, she'll ask again. So, you know, where did dad go? And she might ask again a few minutes later. So it's just paying attention to that and catching that in the moment, because what I'm actually doing by answering her over and over again is I'm over reassuring her. So I think we can all kind of relate to that, where kids kind of go through this, but as kids become more anxious, then they'll ask us these questions more and more and more. They want, it'll kind of up the ante on more and more assurance they need. So if we just sit back, we're probably having 2 or 3 memories right away, or identifying on how we're doing that with our child who might have anxiety and may not. It may just be a normal thing because they're 2. So just again, saying to them, we can kind of catch that even if they don't have anxiety by just challenging them a bit and building those coping skills. So when she asked me, by the second time when she asked me, so where did dad go? I say to her, so what did mommy say where dad went? And then she will have to think about it, and then she tells me the answer. And then a few minutes later, she might ask me again, and I to ask her, you know, well, what did we, you know, where dad went? And she's like, oh, at work. And then she kind of continues, and then it doesn't seem to happen again once I start challenging her a little bit to remember those things. This is one of the main things that parents have taken away from this program, and I've shared with some of my friends who have anxious children, that as soon as we address the over reassurance, it seems to dissipate very quickly, and it works really well once we start identifying that. So, so just some things that reassuring questions that children might ask is like, what if you're late to pick me up? What if our house, something happens to our house? What if the other kids don't like me? What if I get sick? What if, did you lock the door? For some kids older kids who worry, they worry about friends. So they might ask these questions over and over again. So just addressing them in a timely manner. We answer once, then we start to challenge them a little bit again. There's so much more in this chapter that we go through on reassurance. We talk about how to soothe our anxious child, if how to run through a scenario in our head and plan ahead if it's something that's repetitive. We talked about what isn't helpful and what is helpful, and we build on those coping, teaching our children to cope. And we also, in this module, we actually really look at our own selves as parents and what our own feelings are, and it kind of challenges us to kind of change some of our enabling with our children. So it's a great module that we kind of go through. And it also covers excessive checking. So some kids are already starting to build some OCD skills. They start doing some excessive checking. And so that's the great thing that's also addressed in this module. So we're doing all these wonderful skills. And I think the biggest thing that we are challenged with as parents is, our child kind of digs in and says, I don't know if I want to do this. This doesn't feel right. I kind of like the way things were. So we want to motivate our children in good ways and positive ways for change. In this module, we cover motivations and challenging and conflicting motivations, everyday conflicting motivations in our family, rewards, our grandma's rule, and planning effective rewards, and fun approaches to rewarding your child. So motivating youth can be difficult, and the first thing we need to do is to understand what is motivating our child in their anxious behavior. So what is motivating the change in the behavior as well? So in this section, we reflect on as an entire family unit in the home and what anxieties other family members may have that contribute to your child's anxiety. So are they being rewarded for their anxiety? And do we need to offer rewards to encourage motivation to help them work through the anxious habits and symptoms? So like we start using grandma's rule, which is first we do this, then we do this. And breaking things down. We also address and validate that this is a process is not easy by any means. And there is some challenges where your child may be complaining lots and really causing you some stress, trying to negotiate different situations. But what's offered here and written really well is some great communication solutions that we practice in the support section of our group, and different scenarios that help brings the group kind of together. So some of those questions that we might ask, or our child might be, we might ask our child, what did you do at school? Tell me more about that. And they might kind of evade our questions. So over time, we might really grow on those questions. And once they answer us, even if it's like, oh, okay, it was fine. And we want to pull out something. So if they say, well, we played dodgeball today, then we can say, it sounds like you really had fun playing dodgeball at recess. So we're really just trying to promote good communication with our children, and having them know that they can talk to us and be a safe place. So motivating our child is an important factor in this, and there is some really great tools in this module. So our next module is facing fears. Well, as we know, anxiety can be built on a lot of fear. In this module, we talk about preparing ahead, some key principles of fear, anxiety rating scales, areas for face your fear work, and some step-by-step plans, self-evaluation, and the using of stories. So facing fears is difficult for our children and for us as parents to watch our children go through. The key principle here is planning for these situations. So in this module, we explore several situations and scenarios, both in the manual and in support about encouraging children to face their fears. We work through planning situations. And so, for example, if we were working with adults and let's say they were scared of dogs, then we may start exposing them to pictures of dogs. We might have sounds of barking. We might start them doing some exposure therapy to, you know, starting with small dogs, you know, walking to a dog park and standing far away. There's things that we can do to kind of build up to getting to them petting a dog. We do the same thing with children on exposure and facing their fears as well. And we're going to start small and building into things that are bigger, so to build their tolerance level. So in this situation, so we would get them to rate, or the parent can rate their fear scale. So, and kids can say like, that's really scary, that's not so scary. So we can kind of put it on a rating, and then kind of break it down on what would be a little less. So we start big and we kind of move down. So the example that he gives here is how, because he does give a form for you to fill out in the module, and so some areas to face your work. So in this example is, for example, Sarah staying away from home when mom isn't there, or grandma, because grandma's safe too. The fear is as high, and it's a rating of a 10. So maybe we could get Sarah to, you know, walk outside, but be close by. That might be a little less. Staying with an auntie who she really likes, that might be a little less. So we can break it down until we start where she just starts spending maybe an hour away from mom, and building it to that. And we're going to do that exposure over time to build until we get to that 10. So like when we're dealing with fears, we set goals just as like we would with adults. We get them to rate them down and to rate them from 1 to 10. So which one do you want to work on first, and then building until we can get to the bigger one. We always start with the lesser one and then we build to the bigger one. So encouraging cooperation. As we know, when we're dealing with children, cooperation can be challenging. The most important thing is to navigate cooperation and independence together, and because we want to build both. So as parents, we are the captains of our team, and we need to learn how to be teachers and to build skills to be successful. So there's an introduction to praise, so how to praise our children so we can actually build some cooperation within them, to build routine and to provide clear instructions, because even as parents, we are often very keen on giving instructions, but sometimes when we give instructions too quickly or we jump to too many levels at once, it'll make our children very anxious. And so it's building on what instructions we can really break down to help our children. So it's really outlined really well in the module. In navigating through these issues, there are plenty of information on navigating challenges and providing guidance. So some risk factors in this module, we often will tend, because like there is 12 modules, so we tend to group some of the smaller ones together when we do them in the month. So encouraging cooperation and risk factors we tend to do together. So risk factors include family history, stress, sudden onset of upsetting events, modeling, and an overly protective environment, and guilt. So for us, we might want to say, well, why is this so later in the modules? But really, there's no order. We can start with the understanding anxiety and jump to whatever we feel is necessary at the time to understand our child. But the most important thing is that we do identify sometimes as we're working through or wondering, how come our child continues to be anxious and we're kind of coming to our hurdle? This is why this section might be more centered in the book. So as risk factors, both in adults and in the parenting program, we explore family history. So stressful experiences during childhood and events that can be sudden and traumatic. The purpose of this module is really just to gain an understanding of your child and how as a parent, we understand and implement modeling. Reduce being overly protective, and manage our own guilt related to their anxiety. So, you know, like I mentioned before and earlier, is that we often feel guilty for our children's anxiety, and we take on a little bit too much, or we allow them to avoid certain feelings because we don't want them to feel bad. So it's dealing with our guilt. So this chapter kind of addresses us and them at the same time. So there is a scenario here about Scott, who's age 9. He has difficulty to be on his own. Scott has 3 older brothers, and they play and do lots of things together. But as the youngest, Scott is watched so that he doesn't get hurt in any way. When Scott has problems with tasks or with other people, a parent or older brother will step in and solve Scott's problem. Scott doesn't make many decisions on his own. His family decides things for him. Scott takes few risks because Scott doesn't get the chance to try new things on his own or to solve his own problems. He has not learned to deal with the things without his family. Scott is more likely to develop anxiety problems since he has not learned to deal with being away from his family. So it talks about how to work through Scott's situation. And so if we have one that's parallel or similar, then we would be able to kind of use that to navigate on how to work through. So screen time. Screen time is not a new subject. It's pretty much nowadays in every parenting program. There's 2 reasons. One, limiting what our child is exposing themselves to online, such as the news or other information that may heighten their anxiety. And 2 is to help them avoid good coping strategies. So for example, if screen time is reduced, that might give our child an opportunity to do other things such as physical activity, such as walks, sports, or playing outside. All of these things are great coping strategies for anxiety, both in adults and for children. So just to kind of put that perspective for a minute. So if, for example, you were an adult who was anxious, I would recommend that you, as an experiment for someone who doesn't believe that exercise might help them, to monitor the resting heart rate. And so if your resting heart rate, let's say, is like 73, for example, and then you go through a month where you're walking, you start an exercise regimen of some sort, whether it's just walking or whatever you do for physical exertion that you're going to do hard for like 15 minutes. After a month, you might find that your resting heart rate might drop to a 68. So if you could monitor your anxiety during those times, you might find when you get anxious and your heart rate was 73, your anxiety might be like, when you have a panic attack, 181. And then when you actually have done some physical exercise, and then when you have the same situation that might happen after that, your heart rate might only go to 161. It feels very different between 181 and 161, even though it's a slight change. So this is why we recommend exercise for adults. and the same for children. It just helps them work out that excess energy that builds that anxiety, and it helps them feel better overall. So it in screen time, by reducing our screen time, we are encouraging our children to be more active. There is a chart here to monitor screen time through the module, and to decide also what is best for your children and what time of day you're getting the most of that. So some individuals have no concern of screen time. They're already limiting screen time for their children, and that's fine. It's good to go through the manual anyway, because it does talk about just in regards to lifestyles for families, to see if we can make some small changes that might help our children overall. And he offers some great recommendations on how to do that. Bedtime battles. So bedtime battles are a norm for some of us. They can be easily resolved in some ways if we know what to do. And sometimes we're so tired and frustrated at bedtime that we don't always know at the time to think of what can help our children, especially if they're anxious. They tend to be very amped up at bedtime, and that can cause them to have a sleepless night or have trouble falling asleep. So in this module, we'll go through a number of things for bedtime. So bedtime for children is important for both them and us as parents. So children need sleep to help their brain growth and development. As parents, if it is our downtime to practice self-care, unwind, and relax. However, bedtime struggles can interfere and increase our stress as parents. So in this module, it is explored on how we can reduce bedtime battles and introduce routine and reduce habits that may be keeping your child awake and they are unable to settle. So in this module, I believe Dr. Walker has written it very well, and with his colleagues, about common issues with bedtime, how to monitor and the strategies to assist our children in going to bed, and not only just going to bed, but going to sleep. So he talks about resetting our child's body clock and their routine in general. So this module alone was the driving force for one of the families that joined my group this September. And they didn't even really think that they had an anxious child. They just really had trouble at bedtime. And so when they were looking through the book at the sign up, they said, this is the whole reason I want to buy this book. So they just kind of described their daughter to me, who is really having trouble going to bed and going to sleep. And they, like Allison, would not go to bed without mom sleeping with her. And the child was already 9. So this had been going on since they were little. So the mom ended up attending most of the sessions because, like I said at the beginning, they don't have to attend all. They can choose, pick and choose which ones are right for them. We do encourage them to learn them all, but they might want to do that in waves to kind of help focus on one thing at a time. But she did, and she worked through this bedtime strategy, and she said it was basically, it was a week and a half, and she had her daughter sleeping in her own bed, falling asleep, and sleeping without mom. And mom was so excited, she didn't even know what to do with her time because it had, she never had it. So it was really great. Okay, so friendships, the importance of friendships, our changing world, key strategies across the age range and strategies at different ages. So with technology in our changing world, our socialization has changed. I know when I grew up in a small town, we would just go play outside. When we went outside, all the kids in the neighborhood were outside, so it was really easy to make friends. You know, TV was not really a thing unless it was Saturday morning cartoons. We definitely didn't have cable. You know, Dr. Walker, when he come to talk in my group, he mentioned the same thing, is that we would just send our kids outside to play and they would make friends. Nowadays, that's not the way of the world. I know for my own children, you know, they have had friends. There's been no other children in our town for them to make friends. And if you have a child who has other issues with exceptional needs or ADHD or things like that, friendships in general might be hard for them. But we tend to actually hold our kids back in friendships too because of our own fears. So throughout this manual, he really talks about how to develop friendships that we're both going to feel good about, is our children and us. And we won't feel like the world is so scary. Part of that reason he says about the world being scary is because of technology. We're way more aware than we ever have been. Maybe not necessarily the world is more dangerous, but we're definitely aware of the danger more. So just he kind of speaks to that in the module, and it really helps give us a sense that it's okay, and how to kind of resolve our own fears and to help our children be successful at making friends. The last module in this program is handling intense emotions. So any of us who had anxious children, we're going to understand that our kids can be very heightened with their anxiety. We've had many of meltdowns in certain situations because of that anxiety. So he really walks us through on how we can kind of get through and understand our need for control, and how to let go and kind of develop a plan to work through these intense emotions. And he also kind of addresses, like, if the kids have other issues, like I mentioned, exceptional needs, sensory, ADHD, as well with anxiety, is that these intense emotions might even be higher. So really just understanding how we can make a plan. In my group, during the support group piece, we actually sat down and we wrote down on certain plans on how we can formulate it individually with our children. So that way parents really had a solid action plan, because in the moment you're not really thinking. You're just trying to you know, de-escalate your child as fast as possible without getting angry, and so it's providing those really good strategies. So each month they work on one of these modules. We go home, we practice, we come back, and that's why we have that 1 hour support where we can talk about some of those challenges and preparing individuals for when they leave group that day on really being prepared for the next strategy, and regrouping on the last one. So that is coaching for confidence in a nutshell. Hopefully it made all sense. I really love this program. Like I said, it's tried and true for me. I've gotten friends to do it. So you don't have to participate in person in our programs. You can just buy the manual and try it on your own. It depends each area on what they offer. But for us, the 1 hour support, I did have some parents who just bought the manual and came to the support piece and not the teaching piece. I've had people who just bought the manual, and I've also had people who have attended both. So whatever works for you. You know, our outreach workers are always there to support you. So even if you don't come and attend group. So I did have some support resources that our outreach workers have. This is the outreach workers that are roughly around your area. Tami's information as well. So any questions now after my whirlwind presentation?
Thanks so much, Tami. It's great to, or sorry, you just talked about Tami. Thanks, Charity, for sharing about this program with us. It sounds like a very positive one that people can learn a lot from. So I'd encourage people to connect with Tami or whichever worker is in your area. The website is posted in the video comments, as well as Tami's contact info for our area. So that is a place you can connect with that information. And we'll let you direct your questions directly there as well, because we have Dr. Lisa waiting here to present with us as well. So thanks so much. Great to have so many great presenters here with us today.